You're listening to the Certified Personal Trainer Podcast, a show by personal trainers for personal trainers. It's time to become a better trainer, get more clients, and change more lives.
Hello, Coach Alex here with Fitness Mentors. Welcome to part 2 of our 2-part series of Hypertrophy 101 with our special guest, Michael Wittig. If you have not checked out part 1 of this series where we defined hypertrophy, talked about the 3 mechanisms that activate hypertrophy, some of the common misconceptions and mistakes around building muscle, definitely check that out. In this episode, we are going to be diving deep into the nutrition side of things, the psychology side of things, and touching a little bit more on the training side of things as well. So this is really value packed. Hope you enjoyed the first one and hope you enjoy the second one as well. Let's get into it. So let's move to nutrition. We've talked a lot about this. Matt, I'm going to kick it back to you. No pressure to go over all these. I know we've kind of gone over some of them, but if there's anything from a principal perspective that you want to add, please feel free. And then we'll kick it over to Michael.
Yeah, again, same thing with the training for hypertrophy. This could obviously be several hours long. But I really like this quote from Renaissance Periodization, who they do really good work. They're a team of a bunch of different scientists, PhDs, competitors, and they really geek out on this stuff. And this is from one of their ebooks. And so it says, although adherence is not a programmed aspect of a diet, it is critical. If the diet were a race car, adherence would be the driver. Without a driver, the car does not race. A good driver can get the best possible performance with any given machine, but a bad driver can crash even the best car. Simply put, you cannot succeed on a diet you do not follow, regardless of how good the diet is. So yeah, the concept with everything with nutrition, just like with training as well, it's like you can have the best diet in the world, but if you don't follow it, if you're not able to follow it, then it's kind of muck, right? So adherence is the underlying concept that we want to make sure whenever we're programming for ourselves or whenever we're programming for our clients, that we meet the client where they are. And we can have these optimal recommendations all day long, but for example, right, this the high protein recommendation, the third point on this slide, so 0.6 grams per pound of body weight to 0.9 grams per pound of body weight to aid muscle gain. It's like that is on average a good starting point for lots of people. But if you have, let's say, an older woman who is heavier and who has never really focused on her protein intake her entire life, and she's wanting to gain some muscle mass and lose some weight, it's like maybe, if she's 280 pounds or something, that 0.6 grams per pound of body weight is going to be really high for her. And also considering maybe she's only eats like 50 grams of protein a day to start with. So it's like you have to meet the client where they are. And so for her, if she's on average eating around 50 grams of protein per day, well, then a daily goal of 70 grams of protein per day, maybe split across 3 even meals throughout her entire day, that's going to be a massive improvement and will showcase in her results. And that's going to be amazing, despite not being at those quote unquote like optimal levels based on the literature for the average amount of people. So yeah, high protein is obviously going to be ideal to help repair that muscle growth. And then also whenever it comes down to calories, obviously calories are going to be huge. So being in a calorie surplus, we look at the second point, makes it easier to put on muscle, but it's not an absolute necessity for special populations such as like brand new trainees. So it's kind of like a spectrum with this stuff. A calorie surplus is always going to make it easier to put on muscle because you're going to have more nutrients available for that muscle production, right? And for that muscle growth. Whenever you're in a calorie, so just for real quick, a caloric surplus is eating more food than you're burning, right? And so the calorie deficit would be the opposite of that. And whenever we're in a calorie deficit, for most people, it's going to be harder to build muscle because you are going to be using a lot of that energy just for everyday uses, right? Just to function as a human. That's the thing with muscle hypertrophy, is that our bodies aren't necessarily biologically evolved to pack on slabs of muscle, right? It's very energy expensive. And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it makes much more sense to store fat as opposed to muscle mass, because you can use that fat mass. You can store so much fat, and you can use that for weeks and weeks on end, even despite not having as many calories. But for muscle, it's like, it's not necessarily very useful, despite nowadays it's more for aesthetics. So nonetheless, that's kind of the point. So being in a calorie surplus is going to make it easier to put on muscle, but it's not an absolute necessity for brand new trainees, because those new trainees, like Michael talked earlier, it's like them just doing anything, they're going to respond to this stimulus, and they're going to be able to grow muscle. Now, of course, if they're not eating hardly anything at all each day, that's a different story. But for the most part, you can be in a calorie deficit. You can keep your protein high. You can monitor your calories, and you can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. But if you are trying to focus on maximum amount of muscle growth possible, being in a calorie surplus just makes the most sense, because you're going to have that those extra nutrients available to put to use for not just everyday use, but also for this energy expensive muscle that we're trying to put on here. So the calorie adherence is obviously going to be the number one. The second thing is going to be a calorie surplus, or just making sure that you have your calories under control, not too high, not too little. And then also we have here having a high amount of protein each day to help aid the muscle gain. And then I also have down here high fiber, so a minimum of around 20 grams per day, to ensure no micronutrient deficiencies. Because sure, yeah, you want to be in a calorie surplus, you want to make sure that you have high protein, but we also care about our health. We want to make sure that we are healthy individuals, and fiber is found in nutrient dense foods. So like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, these foods that have a lot of micronutrients in them, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. And so by ensuring that our clients are having high fiber on a regular basis, we know, assuming that they're not getting them through supplements, we know that they're probably going to have a high quality diet. And also ensure that there are no micronutrient deficiencies. Whenever you're eating in calorie surplus, micronutrient deficiencies are much less likely, simply because you're eating more food in general. Nonetheless, if we want to optimize everything, the main things are going to be your fiber intake, your protein, your calories, and your adherence whenever it comes to nutrition. So obviously there's much more that we can go into there, but those are kind of the big rocks of nutrition for hypertrophy.
It's such a powerful point too, and a good reminder why it's so important to not just like have this rigid framework and then put every single client into that framework. It's key to understand where they are currently, because as Matt said, for one person making a leap from I had a client, I said, okay, what do you eat in a day? And she said, I mostly eat chips and alcohol. So I'm like, okay. So trying to have her get 90 grams of protein in a day, that's a big leap from where she's at right now. And that's difficult for sustainability.
Yeah, I actually have a quote for that, but also I fully agree. So for people who don't know, so I'm in Kentucky right now. To get my registered dietitian credential, I did a bunch of rotations here in Kentucky, and I can promise you people in Kentucky do not love vegetables. And so it is very, there was a lot of motivational interviewing and a lot of behavioral psychology and things like that you have to work with those clients. And you have to celebrate those small wins. And, even if it's just adding corn to the diet, that's still, going to be better than the potato chips that they were eating. But the pithy quote that I think a lot of you guys that I heard once from somebody, but it's, instead of trying to fit your clients to your methods, you fit your methods to your clients, right? Yes. And that's the main takeaway that I want you guys to have with that, because we have a bunch of tools in our toolbox. At least you should, as an efficient and effective trainer, you should have a lot of tools in your toolbox to achieve the goals that your clients want to achieve. But then you kind of pick and choose those based off of your own analysis of what that client needs, but then also talking back and forth and assessing with them on what they want and need and what they're actually even capable of doing. So yeah, make sure you remember that.
Well, and it's back to our
real powerful.
Go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
The listeners then need to be careful applying what Matt said to when they see programs, because published programs are not made for individuals. They're made for the majority of people. So you're going to see
Yes.
muscle building programs out there. They're going to say anywhere from 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein minimum. And I've seen some up to 2 grams per pound of body weight for extreme muscle. That's not going to be for everybody, like everything Matt just said. So you have to be careful when it comes to published one size fits all trainers out there and programs, because you may need an expert nutritionist or a dietitian to help make that make sense for you. Or you might just gain a bunch of fat in the process, upping your calories and protein to 3 times the amount that you currently bring in.
Right.
Yeah, I'm curious actually for Matt or Michael. Maybe Matt can speak on the nutrition side of things and Michael on the training side of things. But I assume, I know, Matt, you mentioned like you can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. I know I had a lot of clients where that was desirable, especially for a lot of Gen Pop, where they come in and say like they want both simultaneously.
Yeah.
Do you typically advise that? Do you recommend that? How do you kind of navigate that balance?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the client, right? Like it depends on what after assessing, are they a new trainee? So like, for example, if it is a new trainee and they're like, oh, I want to do both. And I'm like, okay, we probably can do both. Well, actually the advice, as far as, because there's difference. There's the actual advice itself, and there's also setting the expectations. For the person who's a newbie, then the expectations like, yeah, it is very possible. And, I have achieved that with many people, et cetera, et cetera. Letting them know that it is very possible as long as they follow these certain sets of goals that we have for them. And then for maybe the more advanced trainee who wants to do that, you're going to be like, look, here's the deal. You've been training for 5 years, for 10 years. It's just you're an advanced trainee. You're already doing a lot of the things right. So it's probably going to lead to more spinning your wheels, trying to do both at the same time, as opposed to trying to do a cutting phase followed by maybe a more muscle hypertrophy phase, where you are doing, so first you're doing a calorie deficit, losing the fat, and then you're fully focusing on gaining the muscle mass after that. You can do both, but the closer that you get, so for example, if it's an advanced trainee and they want to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, well, it's like, cool, you need to make sure that every single thing is dialed in. So your nutrient timing, as far as like your protein intake, you probably are going to maybe have to get that closer to, potentially get that closer to 1 gram per pound, for example. You're going to have to make sure your training is in check. You're going to have to make sure your sleep is in check. You're going to have to make sure your meal frequency, your supplements, your sleep, your stress, all these different things, right? Like as many boxes as you can check, then sure, that's only going to lead to a higher potential of success for achieving those goals. But then it's a matter of trade-offs, right? It's like, what are you willing to trade off? What are you really willing to sacrifice or not? Because, Michael probably does a lot of those things because he is a pro bodybuilder. It's also why he's one of the best in the world at what he does, is because this is his life and this is what he does. He voluntarily makes those sacrifices and trade-offs. But for somebody else, you may have to explain that to them and then let them just essentially lay that out on the table and be like, look, here are your options. Here's the pros and cons of each. And then it's up for you to decide, because it's not up to me. I'm not their dad. They can make choices themselves, but it's up to me to at least lay out the honest truth on here's what's possible, at least in my eyes. Here's what I think is could be expected. And then, you make the choice. You make the choice from there. But yeah, that's usually how it goes. You just have to have an honest conversation with them and what their expectations are and what they're willing to trade off and sacrifice.
Exactly. Going along with that, it depends on their timetable. If people are patient, they can do that.
That's true.
You can do both. It's just a slower process. You're going to lose fat a little bit slower. You're going to build muscle a lot slower. Most people are impatient and they want to build muscle and they want it now. And so trying to do both is not ideal in those cases.
Yeah.
It's a great point.
Makes a lot of sense. From the nutrition front, Michael, any other key principles, anything that's been really key to your experience that we have not touched on yet?
I drink a lot of water, minimum a gallon a day, but more likely nowadays it's about 1.5 gallons. When I work out at 5 a.m., I wake up, I drink 20 ounces in one gulp without just down it, without breathing. And then just a whey isolate shake. And then I go work out. I don't have time to eat breakfast. I don't have time to eat it and it digest and me go work out. I have to get there so I can get back for the kids. That water gives me enough energy to be at the gym at 5 a.m. and crush my workouts at full energy and full focus. Water will wake you up. Water will give you strength. If you're just a couple percent dehydrated, there is research of the lowering of strength. So stay hydrated when you're trying to build muscle. You're going to pee a lot, but drink a lot if you want to build that muscle. I have protein. Now, I like to spread my meals out throughout the day. I do like to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with the snacks in between. I'm probably bringing in food 6 times a day. That's not the only way. You hear about it a lot. That's not the only way to do it. People do it different ways. I have a buddy that eats twice a day. He builds muscle great. He's eating like 1,500 calories or 2,000 calories at a sitting, and he likes it. I can't do that. I can't physically eat that much food, so I have to spread it out throughout 6 times a day. Every one of those meals and every snack or shake is protein in every single one of them. Not protein only, but I'm never going to have a carb-only snack or a fat-only snack. It's going to be a protein in each one of those 6 meals throughout the day. I do pay attention to my own nutrient timing as far as when I have my shakes and my protein. Of course, I'm going to have one right after I work out. If there's a space between a meal, I'm going to have a whey protein shake. I tend to eat more protein than the textbooks will say. I've done this for countless years, and I don't say this is for everybody. For me personally, I bring in about 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight for me. And I've done that for many years. That amount is the same when I'm building muscle as when I'm cutting. That number does not ever change for me. Again, when I'm cutting, all I'm doing is I carb cycle, which means the amount of carbs I bring in changes by the day, depending on my energy expenditure. So leg day is going to be a higher carb day than an off day, which is going to be my lowest carb day. So it doesn't have to be complicated. I have a very simple way of carb cycling that I explain to my clients on how to do it without having to count everything every day and go through the lot of math. But I have high protein myself, and I just manipulate the carbs in if I'm building muscle or not.
Makes a lot of sense. And did you rise to that number? Was that kind of a test and learn process for you for that protein number?
Yeah. It's just for me, because there's textbook numbers, and dietitians and nutritionists will have, and they're different. Dietitian is college, and full-on nutritionist you can get through a certification. So there are different levels of knowledge there for sure. I'm a certified nutritionist. I'm not a dietitian. Sure. Our boy Matt knows more than I do. He can prescribe things that I cannot. But for me, we have these textbook numbers where I'm sure Matt will where we make our educated guess based on in the lab experience, based on education, we make our best educated guess. But then based on results of the client, of the individual, we manipulate the macros and the numbers. That's how I do it, and I'm sure he does it similar. We make our educated guess based on education and experience, but then based on results, we make the changes. So for me, I started out, hey, the 1 gram. Through the years I've experimented, I respond better with 1.5 grams and generally lower carbs than even on the off season than some of my friends that just eat an enormous amount of carbs. I don't need an enormous amount to build muscle. If I have too much, if I have what my buddy has, I just get fat. I'll build muscle, but I'll put on too much fat. So for me, I had to find the balance of macros that puts me in the surplus without gaining too much fat in the off season. And for me, it's a higher protein number than having extraordinary amount of carbs that some of my peers will have.
Makes sense. Sam, do we have any questions on this front before we move on? Okay.
We do. So we have 2 questions, guys. And they're both from Evelyn. So the first one is, can you gain muscle in a slight calorie deficit? If so, would you recommend being 100 to 250 calories in a deficit?
So I'll take it. So I guess I somewhat answered this in because she asked this about 15 minutes ago. But I think I answered most of the question. But so I mean, 100 and 250 calories deficit. I think first you need to figure out what their calorie maintenance is. And for people who don't know, the calorie maintenance is essentially how much do they need to eat and their activity levels to maintain their weight consistently over time. And then, so a slight calorie deficit would be, so like you said, maybe 100 to 250 calories below that number. So it's typically, again, that's a good starting point. I say start with that. And then as far as you want to make sure also that their protein is high, again, closer to that 1 gram per pound is definitely going to be more favorable for that whenever in a calorie deficit. Also, depending on the client that we're talking about, right? Depending on if it's the advanced trainee or if it's the more of the newbie. So there's a lot of different variables here, and then of course you have to make sure that their workouts are sufficient as well. You have to make sure that their training is in line, because that's it's. I don't really like the at least whenever it comes to the main goal of improving body composition. So increasing muscle mass and decreasing body fat, to say, oh, it's 80% nutrition or it's 20% training or whatever it is. It's like, it's 100% nutrition and 100% training, because they do two different things. They do, sure, they work synergistically together, but it's like, we're talking, it's too simple of an explanation. And so, I think that there's a lot of different variables that go in line there, but more so 100 to 250 calories, that's a good starting point. If they're losing maybe around, well, again, with this, you want to probably take their weight. You want to also probably take body measurements as well, if you're trying to lose fat and build muscle at the same time, because if they are doing that effectively, the scale could stay the same, but their waist measurements could go down and then their limb measurements could go up. So that's, I would say start there and then trial and error based off of using different types of progress that you're monitoring whenever it comes to body weight pictures and then also body measurements. And then I'll just move on to the next question that she had too. So what is a safe calorie surplus for gaining muscle and not gaining too much fat as well? So like a clean bulk. And this is going to be kind of the same answer, except in the other direction, right? You kind of can start around maintenance, and then based off of how much you're gaining or losing, or if you're maintaining or not, then add in 100, 200 calories, something like that. And just making sure you need to monitor your rate of weight gain on a weekly basis. Typically for a lot of people, that could be around like 0.5 to 1 pounds per week on average. That could, again, that's just a basic recommendation. And then also making sure that you focus on their body measurements. So that would be their waist measurements, because again, you can't displace fat to different areas. However, by taking these measurements, you can actually see, okay, their waist measurements are going up too quickly. They're also gaining weight too quickly. So we know we probably can pull back a little bit on the calories, and they can still gain at a appropriate rate. And so, yeah, whenever it comes down to an exact number for what the calorie surplus should be, that's going to be variable on the person. But I would say add in enough to meet that rate of weight gain per week and per month, and then also making sure their measurements are staying on track. And then of course you can have people track you can have people get their labs tested and things as well. That's always going to be a bonus too. So yeah, hope that.
Just realize it's going to take a long time. I'm going to assume Carrie is a female, probably, being a female, and if you're natural, depending on your age, that rate of muscle of weight gain per week maybe a lot lower than 0.5.
Sure.
Like for me, it's not at 46, natural is not going to be the same weight gain per week 20-year-old that's maybe taking some stuff or just being 20 in general. So really your gender, your age, your hormone levels, natural or not, getting your lab tested. Like it's important for me. I recommend anyone over 40 get your testosterone checked yearly, just so you know where the numbers are at, so you're not spinning wheels. But Carrie, what he said is right on. That little bit of a surplus, but just realize, being a female, I don't know your age, if you're natural, that rate of muscle building is going to, and trying to do it while lean bulking, it's going to take a really long time. So you just got to be patient. You can do it. Just be very patient and be in for the long haul, and don't expect a 0.5 weight gain every week and not gain too much fat doing it.
Yeah,
sure.
And I think this leads in really nicely to kind of our last topic, which is the mental side of this game, of the muscle building game. Matt, something you said early on in that process is which I'd love for you to just touch on this first, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts, Michael, but around like the measurement of seeing muscle, it can be harder to see that progress versus fat. In this first point here, but What are your thoughts on that?
So that's essentially, let me see if I'm making sure. Yeah. So that's the whole point of this first point here, is that fat loss can be much more motivating for people because the results can be much more immediate, right? You can lose weight this is exactly what Michael was kind of talking about. Muscle growth can be a much longer process. And if you're also gaining a little bit of fat on top of that, you're not going to be able to notice some of these gains that you're making potentially until, several months have gone by and it's very noticeable, or you end up doing another fat loss phase so that you can kind of reveal the hard-earned muscle that you have built. Right. But with fat loss, it's like changes can happen weekly. You can, see new striations, you can have different definition, you can see your love handle shrinking, you can have different veins, right? It can be very visibly motivating. And so you have to have more patience with this goal of muscle hypertrophy, because you can put in some work months and months on end, and it can feel like you're not making as much progress as you are. Also because you look at yourself every single day. And so this is why it can be important to have a second set of eyes, or you take pictures maybe once every month, and then you can look at the side by sides. You can actually notice, I do have more roundness to my delts or something like that. Some things that you don't see on an everyday basis, but making sure you're monitoring that progress over time is going to be huge. And then, so speaking of progress, with the second point is, one of the more practical ways to improve motivation and long-term adherence is to focus on strength performance in the gym instead of these aesthetic qualities. So essentially, instead of trying to find your motivation from these different muscles getting bigger in the mirror, these aesthetic qualities, strength performance in the gym is very objective, right? So for example, there's good reason to believe that if your bench press is increased by 15 pounds, in the 6 to 12 rep range, for example, and you've been eating properly, then you probably added some growth to your muscle in your chest, right? And so that can be very motivating for people. And also that can be the funnest part, is you try to, quote unquote, beat the logbook every single time you go in the gym. That can keep you coming back for more and more whenever the aesthetic qualities, which, could be a completely different discussion, but maybe that's not a worthwhile goal, or at least the main goal that you should have whenever doing these things, because that can be a very slippery slope in the first place with your relationship with yourself, with your body, with food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I think that it's fine to want to improve those aesthetic qualities, but if you're worried about motivation, if you're worried about long-term adherence, like Michael said earlier, definitely turn it into a lifestyle. But then also whenever it comes to building muscle, focus on your strength performance in the gym, in that 6 to 12 rep range. And just over time, again, you don't have to max out. You don't have to do anything crazy like that where you potentially have to injure yourself. But for my clients, sometimes I'll have them do AMRAP sets at the end. So as many reps as possible. So they have 4-week phases. At the end of those 4 weeks, I'll have them do some type of as many reps as possible with, say, a big compound lift like bench, squat, deadlift. And then in 8, 12, 16 weeks later, I'll have them do another AMRAP set with that same exercise at that same percentage. So maybe it's 70% of their 1 rep max or 80% of their 1 rep max, just estimated, for example. Then we know, okay, in week 4, they got 135 for 5 reps. And in week 16, they got 135 for 8 reps. That's going to be a very clear example of objective strength progression, assuming that technique and every other variable was kept the same as well. That's kind of the quick lowdown on the some of the psychology stuff that I've ran into personally, and then with my clients too.
Yeah, and sometimes it's up to us to point out what progress looks like too. There's a lot of clients who say, "Well, I've gained a pound. What the heck's going on? I'm in a fat loss phase. What's happening?" And sometimes it's up to us to see, well, let's look at your measurements. Let's look at how you feel. Let's look at how certain clothes fit on you. These are often going to be more telling than what the scale is saying. If you were here during our fat loss webinar, the scale is only reflective of body weight, which tells one piece of the entire story. So having these tools in our toolbox of how do we measure progress, especially from a hypertrophy standpoint, the scale is a tool, but some people get obsessed with it. And so it's important to have other tools in our toolbox to say, actually, like, you have been making progress. Here are objective ways that you have been making progress that we can open their eyes to. I'm curious on your end, Michael, what, again, I go back to, you've made this a lifestyle. With yourself or with clients, what type of mental barriers have you seen, and how have you overcame them?
Well, going on what you guys are talking about is track. Nobody wants to work out for months and months and get no results. That's just a fact. If we're seeing strength increases or not, that's awesome. But at the end of the day, people want results. I mean, we're not going to get results day in and day out. Life's not like that. We have ups and valleys. But tracking what you're doing is highly important. It can be motivating. So like you were saying, yeah, the scale, that's easy to get. Measurements, when you're trying to build muscle, that's a great thing to get. Get your body fat, do an in-body or something so you know the percentage. And that's something you can do monthly or every other month and have an idea if you are building muscle or losing fat or doing both. Keep a logbook. Don't just go in the gym and pick up random weights and just lift randomly. Some guys can do that. There's times I do that, but I've been doing this for a long time and I know what my limits are and I know how to push them. But keep a logbook so you know what you did last time and try to do 1 rep more. Or maybe 2 weeks later, maybe you're doing 5 more pounds. You got to keep track of it to be progressive. And like Matt was saying, then when you see those increases of a 1/4 inch on your arm, when you see, hey, you're bench pressing 10 pounds more, when you look at your in-body and it's like, oh, my lean muscle mass is up, that's motivating. That will help. One of the big things that I apply myself and I talk to people about is you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent. Yeah. Life's going to happen. You're going to get sick. You're going to maybe hurt yourself. Your kids are going to get sick one day and you can't go to the gym. Things are going to happen. And it's about how you're going to respond to them. What are you going to do the next day? Yeah, you may not have had the best workout today. You may eat too much pizza, but what are you going to do tomorrow? No one's going to be perfect. There's some of us have those personalities that we like perfectionism. I'm kind of like that, but I've learned as I get older that's not a great way to be in life, because life is not rigid. You have to be malleable and kind of go with the flow a little bit. Yeah. But just realizing you don't have to be perfect. Do your best. Follow sound principles, but be consistent. I experienced a lot of this with acting the last 2 years. I've always been 6 days a week working out forever, because I like it. I enjoy it. You don't have to do that. I just like to do that. But with acting, there's days where I was on set and I couldn't do nothing. There's no getting up at 4 because I was already up at 4 to drive 2 hours to set. And during this contest prep, for the first time, there's weeks where I only worked out 3 times a week. I've never done that being a professional athlete. But you know what? I got the same results because I kept my mind positive. I buckled down on my new nutrition all those other days I couldn't work out. And the 3 days I worked out, I just hit my whole body. I just changed it. I knew what was going to happen and I changed it. I kept positive and I did my best, got the same results. You don't have to check off every box every single day. You just got to get the majority of them and then be consistent and try to get them all the next day. You'll get the same results as long as you keep it positive here in the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. And consistency is such a good buffer for when something goes wrong. If you've been consistent for 10 years, taking 2 days off is going to have very little impact on things. Which it can feel like the opposite when you've been lifting for 10 years, where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm missing a day, my life's over. But in reality, really nothing's changing. It's the same, like you have one pizza. If you eat well the majority of the time, it's really not going to make a difference in the long haul.
Yeah. And for people that haven't made it a lifestyle yet, it's just do your best. And when you mess up, forget about it and do it better the next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to be perfect. Just do your best, because life's going to come at us some days. So if you already realize that, just know that you're not going to quit. That whatever happened to you today, no matter how traumatic it is, you didn't quit. Maybe you need a day or 2 off to deal with something, but get right back on it. You'll get results over time.
Totally. Yeah. Think about the path you're on, guys. I'm just reiterating what Michael said, but sometimes, one individual day, think about, what's the trend? We think about like finances. We're like, oh, it's down one day, I'm freaking out, I'm selling. It's like, but look at the overall trend, and if you're trending up and you're doing the right things consistently, puts a lot less weight on these negative things or these off days or when life happens, because it's absolutely inevitable that it will.
And your mind is powerful. We work out, we eat right to be healthy. It's our body has to be healthy, but your mind has to be healthy too. So find a way of eating and working out that keeps you mentally sane, that keeps you happy, because you're just going to be healthy all around if you find that good balance.
Yeah. It's awesome. Sam, do we have any questions in the chat to get to?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of questions. We had a question about some specifics within the nutrition that we recently just talked about. Are meat alternatives such as Beyond or Impossible products considered a good substitute for lean protein?
So such as Beyond or Impossible products considered a good substitute for lean protein. So I'm assuming you're talking like as far as like chicken, turkey, fish, something like that. It depends, right? Like not necessarily as far as the amino acid profile, lean proteins from animal proteins are typically going to be better than meat alternatives such as Beyond or Impossible products. So again, it depends on if you're asking for the like ethical side of things, or if you're talking about more so the actual nutrient profile. In short, for the most part, if you're getting protein from plants, you're going to have to eat a little bit more, and typically a little bit more diverse sources to match the same quality as meat sources. So yeah, I mean, the blunt answer is that meat proteins are simply going to be a bigger bang for your buck whenever it comes to higher quality protein. But again, for ethical reasons, that's going to be kind of up to you. I would also, the Beyond and Impossible products, I would stick with more of the kind of like whole food sources as well. If you are going to choose plant proteins, I would go more the whole food route, and then use those more as kind of like supplements, to be honest. Not the majority of your diet, but here and there. I think that's okay. You're going to be fine. Let's
Awesome.
see. And then
Did
Sam,
you
you want me
see,
to go ahead and knock out the next one, Evelyn's?
Yeah, Evelyn's. I was going to say that's also, I feel like that's a great question because I've definitely had clients in the past that asked that about like what
so
they should be eating on non-training days.
She said, are they eating at that number on the days they don't train? Example, if we establish a person should eat 1,700 calories to gain muscle, are they eating 1,700 calories on non-training days? I think that this is definitely a nuanced subject, and I think that there's different opinions and things on this. But my opinion is like, I think that it's too short of a period to worry about, and 90% of people probably don't need to worry about it, simply because what I've found is that anytime I try to, and again, it depends on the person, but for most of Gen Pop, the more that I change up their calories on a day-to-day basis, the more variables that I throw at them to try and change around their diet. So they need to have 1,700 calories on this day, and then say 1,500 calories on this day. There's too much variation there for them, and it's too much. As far as their scheduling goes and their rituals and what they eat every single day, it's much easier for me to just be like, hey, every single day we're going to eat 1,600 to 1,800 calories every day on training and on non-training days. For some people, maybe that's boring. For some people, especially if they're more advanced trainees, maybe they want to do 5 days at a certain amount of carbs or a certain amount of calories, and then they have, say, 2 refeed days, right? Or something like that, something where they have a higher amount of calories on 2 days of the week on their 3 off days or whatever it is. But for the most part, I feel like physiologically, it's not going to, I feel like it's too transient of a period to make any significant difference on a day-to-day basis outside of improving adherence. That's just and also on the days you're not training is also on the days that you're recovering. So eating less on those days could actually you're still recovering from the workout you did yesterday today, right? So just because you're not working out today doesn't mean that those processes still don't need those nutrients and things like that. So that's kind of my take on it. For the most part, I think you're just complicating it too much. I would just stick to the constant amount.
I agree with Matt completely. For the majority of clients, don't worry about it. If you're a pro athlete and you do it for your living, that's a little bit different situation. But what he says, like when I'm building muscle, yeah, I don't worry about eating less on any day. I'm trying to build muscle. So I don't now when I'm cutting though for contest, that's a whole different thing. I do eat less carbs, less calories on my off days, but that's when I'm cutting. My goal then is just to retain as much muscle mass as possible. That's why my protein count stays high. And that's when cutting though. When trying to gain, I don't worry about eating less. even on my off days, because I'm trying to build muscle, and Matt said exactly right. It's just easier when you don't have to think about that one little component. I think a lot of people do there's so much information out there, it's easy to overcomplicate things. And that's a lot of people we run into, just because there's so much information out there. It's easy to overcomplicate it. Keep things simple, follow the basics, and only make changes when you need to. If you're getting results doing something, keep doing it. Don't change it and nitpick it if you're getting results already.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Were there any others, Sam?
So someone asked about the recording, and we will have a recording of this webinar, guys. So that actually gets sent out to everyone, but if it doesn't, feel free to email us and we will send you guys that recording. Other than that, I think this is a good spot for, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat right now. We will take more.
Oh, actually, Richard Logwood put one in the chat. He said, "I'm a vegetarian, but use
nice
into the Q&A."
Oh, awesome.
He said, "I'm a vegetarian, but use a lot of whey. Do I need to worry about my amino acid profile?" Yes. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think everybody should not worry about their amino acid profile. But as far as like getting in enough protein every single day, that's typically for most people going to allow you to get a wide variety of the amino acids that you need to take in. So getting in enough protein every day, that should be your main concern. But then, yes, as a vegetarian, you might need to take in a little bit more than, say, somebody who is getting in a lot of different diverse meat proteins as well. But the fact that you use whey is really good. So that's a great supplement. But is whey a complete profile? Yeah, whey is actually as far as amino acids go, is the highest quality. Whey protein is going to be the highest quality protein that you can have based off of the amino acid profile. And then it goes a bunch of other different meat proteins, and then you have plant proteins underneath that. So yeah, whey is assuming that it is a quality whey protein.
Quality brand. That's what I was going to
exactly.
say.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Michael knows.
There's some ways
Michael
you can go out there and get at Walmart. We're not here to push supplement brands or none of the companies here, but there are some inferior products out there that aren't tested. There's a lot of sugar. There's fat in it. There's maybe amino acids. There's companies that will mislabel and say we have X amount of protein in our thing, but a lot of those are loose amino acids that you're just not using at all. So you do have to be mindful. Just research, do some quality research into what you're taking, because you're doing this for health. So why would you put something potentially harmful in your body? There's supplements that companies out there that are getting sued for heavy metal contamination. Big brands that that you at some point probably bought, but they all under the radar. You don't hear about these lawsuits. But be careful what supplements you concentrate on. On whole foods. Supplements are only going to help this much. In the case of the vegetarian, yes, they're going to help maybe a little bit more. So be very careful and do research into what you're taking so that it's benefiting your health and not actually harming you.
I agree.
Yeah,
fully agree. And the what he's talking about with the amino acids. So if you do want to deep dive into that, it's called amino acid spiking. And I think they've actually cracked down on it quite a bit because it's gotten so popular, or it's gotten, at least the awareness around it has gotten more popular, at least in my neck of the woods of the internet, I guess. But amino acid spiking is what they do. And so they're able to put in certain amino acids within the protein powders that raises the nitrogen levels within the testing. And it then shows up on the nutrient. They're able to put on the nutrient label more protein than the actual powder contains. So it's really tricky stuff, but like I said, they have cracked down on that. And I feel like it's not as prevalent, but
just because it's cheaper doesn't mean you're actually saving money. You might pay less money, but your body's actually using less protein than the other brand that maybe costs a little bit more. And I see one last question here is, how do you know if it's a good quality whey? That's the thing with supplements, is they're not regulated, so you kind of have to do your own research. I say stay away from myself. For me, I don't take supplements that have artificial colors and flavors in it. I'm doing this for health, so I'm not going to basically eat a ground up candy bar. That's one thing. And there are different certifications supplements certain ones can get that are third party tested. You want ones that are tested for heavy metal contaminants, and other things that could be in them. Is label accuracy, transparency. There's a lot of things I look at when deciding what supplements to take.
For the most part, like, yeah, exactly what he said. Most companies that really pride themselves on the quality, like, you're going to know because they're going to put it in front of your face. They're going to give you, like, they will actually give you access to the third party testing that you can check out yourself. So that typically is the route to go. I would actually look to see, do they have data testing for that, and is it available, as opposed to just saying it somewhere randomly on the tab or on the label. I do think that I do know there is one stamp of approval that you can look for. I think it's the NSF. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it is NSF, and that is one of the. Let me type this in real quick.
Yeah, so I didn't want to miss talk too. I know there's a few of them out there. That is one of them. And I can't.
Oh, it's the National Sanitation Foundation. And so basically, like, that is one of the stamp of approvals that you can, if you see on the label, that it can be pretty guaranteed that it's going to be quality. But for the most part, check out those, check out the actual lab results if that's something you're concerned about.
I feel like I've been a student on this one, and I could not be happier.
Loved it.
I mean, this was, I feel like I was an audience member, and this was amazing. We're going to wrap it up here in a few minutes. Michael, I want to ask you about if you have any resources or people that you think that you'd recommend. Before you answer that, I will recommend you as a really great resource. You see his Instagram there, Wittig Works. I follow him. The amount of practical information. He has free programs on there. Really, if you're getting into training, it's a no-brainer follow in my book. And then all of our other Instagrams as well are not as good. Matt's maybe. Yes, highly recommend that. But Michael, is there anyone else, any other books, any podcasts, any resources that you look up to for people who are wanting to kind of dive deeper into this stuff?
Well, I'm really old school. So when I started, I picked up my first weight at 15 because I was so skinny. My dad bought me a Weider bench set. Crazy. It was gray with red lettering, and my plates were gold plated. I wish I still had it because it's plastic.
It's amazing.
And then he gave me a book that I still have today. I have a lot of fitness books, but this book I still probably look at the most, even though it's a bit outdated. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. It's this big. It's one of the original printings. And I still just look through it all the time just for fun or to look something up. Some of the principles are a little outdated now, and we have new research today, but it's still a classic book. And there's an older one too that I really like, called Beyond Built, written by Bob Paris, who was a really aesthetically looking, had a great symmetry, physique back like in the 80s. He doesn't do bodybuilding anymore. He's like a writer now up in Canada. But I really like his book Beyond Built. You could probably still find him somewhere, but when my sons, who are teenagers now, want to start lifting, besides helping them myself, I said, read these books. I gave him Beyond Built and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia to get started.
Love it.
And then I learn from everybody. I keep an open mind.
Yeah.
I may work with a brand new certified trainer, and I may, by being open-minded and watching, I still learn stuff. Totally. I learn stuff by not putting myself up here and realizing I can learn from everybody. I've been doing it for a while, but I'm still learning every day, and I can learn from a beginner to other advanced master trainers that I follow. Guys like Chris Gethin and Jim Stepani, and there's a lot of internet fun stuff they do too, but there's a lot of experts out there that really know what they're doing, and I follow them and know some of them personally, and just being open-minded to learn from whoever you meet is valuable, and continuing your own education. I'm certified, but I take a new course every other year to not only keep my status, but to keep learning more. I just finished a new one now that I always typically finish them, and then I take my exams during the downtime of Thanksgiving. So I just finished a new course, and I'll be taking the final exam and writing the essays and the practicals over the next week. And I do this every 2 years just to keep up my knowledge base and keep learning. So keep learning and be open-minded to learn from others.
Love that. Yeah, always be a student. I mean, and I think that's a key reason why you're so successful in a lot of areas of life. You know, that mentality, as soon as you think you know everything, you're right. And now your mind is closed off to new learnings. And I think that's a tough place to be.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us.
We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody. Hope it's a time of relaxation, spend time with loved ones, a time to reflect on all the things that we're grateful for in this life. You know, I've been trying to practice gratitude a lot more in my life. And sometimes you have to go back to the basics of, like, I woke up today. I have my health. I have a roof over my head. I'm able to even think about, should I eat plant-based protein? Should I have that? You know, a lot of the conversations were happening. That's even a luxury for many. So I hope the remainder of this week is just filled with love and gratitude, and hope that extends through the end of the year and forever.
As always, thanks for listening to the Certified Personal Trainer Podcast. You can learn more about Fitness Mentors at fitnessmentors.com. Be sure to share this podcast on social media. And remember, we are here to help you succeed.